work session with the roll call show that we are all here. The first thing on our agenda, we invite Mr. Claybarg, rather, to visit with us about warning sirens.
Yes, Mayor, again, members of the City Council, again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to meet with you this evening and kind of talk about the Crow Wing County outdoor warning sirens. Now, Trevor's already heard the presentation once, so I apologize. I haven't updated any new slides on it. The presentation itself goes for about an hour, but I'm going to try to kind of scale it down so that I can go into as much information or as little information as you'd like. But just to kind of give you a little bit of history on it, Crow Wing County, or the state as a whole, again, with the outdoor warning sirens, what we're finding is Crow Wing County isn't the only one kind of going through this, looking at our warning sirens, because a lot of the infrastructure is aging, and what does that look like across the county-wide? And I know I'm working with Morrison County, Mille Lacs County, and the other counties throughout the state. We're kind of on this point to where some counties have completely got rid of their warning sirens just because they, have fallen into disrepair. Well, others are kind of stepped up and said, okay, well, we don't want to lose that resource. We don't want to lose that asset. So we want to make sure that things are maintained orderly and properly across the board. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And did a presentation. I'm kind of on a traveling roadshow right now. I'm hitting all the townships and all the city councils, everyone who, all our stakeholders that have infrastructure for sirens, and kind of talking about kind of where we're at and where we'd like to go in the future as well as far as our warning sirens throughout the county. So I got a little video here to see if it works.
And people in those areas may have been alerted to last night's bad weather thanks to outdoor warning sirens. Meteorologist Adrian Vaughn has more about how they work. Whether you've called North Texas home your whole life, or maybe you're a newcomer to the area, you know when the outdoor warning sirens go off, the weather is about to get serious. A lot of people call that noise a tornado siren, but it's actually an outdoor warning siren, and they can be used to alert you of more than just tornadoes. Outdoor warning sirens are strategically placed throughout the entire area, warning Texans that a dangerous storm is moving in. There's a chance, though, if you're inside your home, you may not hear them at all.
Is for people that are outdoors to go inside and seek additional information about why those sirens are being sounded.
If you hear the sirens going off, that means you need to take immediate action. Get to a safe place, an interior room, away from windows, and on the lowest level of your home or nearby building. Some people, when they hear the sirens, automatically think they are in the immediate path of a tornado. And that's not always the case.
The City of Dallas activates the outdoor warning system whenever we receive a warning from the National Weather Service that contains hail of 1.5 inches or greater, winds of 70 miles per hour or greater, or a tornado warning anywhere in the City of Dallas.
You're most likely to hear the sirens in spring. April and May are North Texas's most active tornado months, with the severe weather season stretching into early June.
It's important to understand the risk that you face in your community.
Adrian Vaughn, NBC5.
So before taking the position as Crow Wing County's Emergency Management Director, which I've been in roughly about three years now, prior to that I was a police officer here at the City of Baxter for roughly 19 years, and we'd always hear the outdoor warning sirens go off on that first Wednesday of the month at 1 o'clock, and our dispatch would ask us, hey, you hear the sirens going off, and we'd roger up and say, yep, we hear them on there. And not really, at that point, not knowing kind of the backstory and everything when it comes to the warning sirens as a whole. They're always, as the video talked about, are referred to as outdoor warning sirens, but commonly you hear them referred to as tornado sirens. Specifically talking about, well, they're specifically designated for severe weather or tornado. But for the outdoor warning sirens, they're much more than that as well. They're again referred to as outdoor warning sirens, so they can be used for not only inclement weather, tornadoes, severe winds, hail, but also if we had any type of our wildfire that we had this spring up in close to Cross Lake. Had those winds been shifted into a different direction, the city of Cross Lake that has roughly 11 outdoor warning sirens would be activating those warning sirens, letting their population know that, hey, get inside, seek information, which would be that evacuation notification, and getting them prepared. noticed in the wildfires in Maui, they didn't utilize their outdoor warning sirens because they, again, talked about them, or the education piece that they had for their population was that there were tsunami sirens. So anytime they heard the siren go off, they would go inland and away from the water. So that was one of the kind of the takeaways or lessons learned that they had, is again referring to them as outdoor warning sirens, because had they been able to activate that, they could have let the population know, hey, those wildfires are coming, and also that they wouldn't go inland because they're thinking a tsunami was coming. So there's a good messaging piece that is taking place not only here in the United States as far as continental, but Hawaii and other areas as well. So today's, we're gonna again talk about best practices, kind of where we're at, and why we currently do what we do as far as our activation policies, our review of the current siren infrastructure throughout the county, existing policies, discussions on the siren's capabilities, public feedback that we've had up to this point, technical assessments, modernization, funding options, and then lastly, the actual RFP that we're going to talk about in that memorandum of agreement as far as trying to get onto a preventative maintenance program for all of our sirens throughout the county. Currently, there's 52 sirens in the county, again, scattered throughout the county. Most of them are here in Brainerd, Baxter, and then also over in the city of Cross Lake. So between those three locations, the majority of our sirens. However, we do have some sirens, again, ones or twos, one up in Emily, we have one in Garrison, and two up in Ideal Township, and onesie-twosies kind of spread out throughout the county as well. So we want to make sure that everybody and all of our sirens are being maintained the same across the board, because I think our community, again, should have known as those severe storms come in and we activate those sirens, that they're going to go off. Now, the cities and the townships are the ones responsible. The constituents say that, hey, we'd like outdoor warning sirens, so that those stakeholders will pay to put those sirens in. The county is responsible for the infrastructure for setting them off. So our VHF system, all of our equipment that we have in our dispatch center, all that the county is responsible for, in addition to our basically towers that we have our VHF paging system on to ensure that the sirens are activated when they're when the need arises. The coverage areas are going to be very dependent on the type of year. If we have it in the fall when the leaves are off, that sound carries, and then undoubtedly when the storm is coming in and they have high winds or heavy rains, then they can be dissipated as well, that coverage area. We have, again, the county maintains that infrastructure for setting them off. The city and townships have the responsibility of putting those sirens in if they so choose. And we also have one homeowners association as well within the county that maintains one of our outdoor warning sirens. And then the activation, again, is through the Crow County Sheriff's Office. Currently, the Sheriff's Office will receive a message from the National Weather Service indicating there's severe weather, and then our dispatch center will set those sirens off. There is, and looking towards the future, a two-way cellular option where the National Weather Service, when they send out that polygon for a tornado warning, those sirens within that specific polygon would activate. What we've we had in the past is we've tried to get away from is those blue sky warnings where the sirens are going off and folks are, there's no storm in sight. So trying to get away from that, or ensuring that those locations where the severe weather is the only sirens that are currently going to be set up. So kind of making sure that that all of our sirens, the programming accommodates that. This is the current view of the sirens and kind of where they're located throughout the county. This is just an example of a sound map. If you've seen one before putting in a siren is where do we want to put it, what would have the greatest effect. When you look out outdoor warning sirens, I know we've gotten calls from folks saying, well, I can't hear it in my house. It's not intended to be heard inside a house. We want to make sure that the sirens are in locations, particularly if you were Baxter, with all the trails that Baxter has. People are out in the recreation areas, in the parks. They're all walking on the trails with their families. That those areas are covered. So they may have left their cell phone back at their house because they wanted to get away from being contacted or messaged. But or those campgrounds, or like we're looking at that were by BIR, where you have those large concentrations of folks. Baxter has the Night to Unite event as well, so ensuring that we have large congregations of people that if they're out and severe weather comes in, that those outdoor warning sirens are getting them that information that, hey, we need to seek shelter and gain additional information. Existing policies, there's no requirement to have outdoor warning sirens. It's basically kind of governed or managed by the Association of Minnesota Managers, and it kind of outlines guidance as far as what their recommendations are. The video that we had on there from Texas, from Dallas, kind of is along those same kind of guidelines that are pushed out nationwide when it comes to the tornado warnings, the severe winds in excess of 70 miles an hour, and large hail as well. So those kind of are the main ones when it comes to severe weather. But again, they can be activated for other events as well. If you had a train derailment along here where anhydrous ammonia is released, and we want to ensure that folks are sheltering in place, again, those outdoor warning sirens can be utilized for that as well. And as mentioned, that first test Wednesday of the month at 1 p.m., Cronin County activates those outdoor warning sirens to, and again, it says test on there, because I think it comes across on that, but what we want to do and get that messaging out is for folks that if they hear those sirens, not just to think, okay, well, the sirens are going off and the county's testing them, but to kind of get in that thought process of, well, if this were an actual event, what would I do? If it were severe weather, where would I seek shelter? If I'm at Costco or if I'm at Fleet Farm or I'm out grocery shopping and I hear the sirens, is there a storm shelter nearby that I can get to? Is there a location? So trying to get the population, public to kind of think about, well, if they do go off, what would I do in that case? Rather than just saying, oh, they're just testing them for the sake of making sure that they work. System capabilities, Ranger coverage we talked about as far as that's going to vary dependent on those environmental conditions. And then we also have some sirens throughout the county that don't have a battery backup as well. So if we lose power, those sirens would cease to function as they should be. There's sirens that most of the sirens are hooked up to, again, direct power, and there are some where there's no power options that are available, and there are just a cellular battery operated. The public feedback and observed issues, we've gotten several, complaints that have come in from folks and say, well, why don't I have a siren in my area? Again, it's based off of jurisdiction and the need. We've gotten folks that have called in and said that they can't hear the siren from their house, and again, we'll explain to them that the intent of the siren isn't to be heard from your house, but to be outdoors, and again, we're focusing on those high population areas. We've had calls in as far as sirens being inoperable or not functioning like they should, and then trying to work through that process with the owners and the stakeholders to figure out why they're not working, and how can we make sure that they're getting fixed so that they are functioning when the time is needed. Confusion about what the siren means, refer to them as tornado sirens or civil defense sirens, trying to get that messaging out there that they're outdoor warning sirens, and they can be utilized for an array of warnings to include wildfires, chemical release, or severe weather. The iPods are those wireless emergency alerts that you'll get on your phone. So if a tornado warning is activated, the National Weather Service will send out a polygon, and we'll talking about a diagram of what that looks like. But that was another thing we get folks that say, hey, we get a tornado watch on our notification saying that there's a tornado coming towards Crow Wing County. But then when the tornado warning goes out, they say, well, why didn't I get the warning? So that warning doesn't go throughout the county like the tornado watches do. The tornado warnings are those specific polygons where the National Weather Service will set out in that specific area where that storm is going through. So that storm may only cover a corner of Crow Wing County, and then the rest of it will be in Cass County. So only that area where that polygon is should be receiving those warnings. So we'll get folks that will call in and say, well, why didn't I get the warning? I got the tornado watch, but I saw that Emily is in a tornado warning. Why didn't I get that? And again, that's based off the National Weather Service. They're looking at that storm as it's going through and said, hey, 3/4 of Crow Wing County isn't affected by the storm. Only the north half is, and that's where that tornado warning is being activated and sent out for. Not intended for one specific hazard, as we mentioned before. And then those public expectations, the public, when undoubtedly wants to ensure and should expect that those sirens are being maintained and that the time comes that they'll be activated and functioning properly as needed. We also have another way where the population can opt in through the Crow Wing County Alert System, and it's managed through Everbridge. A lot of our campgrounds utilize this, where they'll go into the campground, they can scan the QR code, and they can sign up for alerts that happen in Crow Wing County, and you can go in there and select, okay, I want to hear everything about weather. That can be just all your weather alerts, from your fog advisories to severe weather. And then there's other ones where the county utilizes for road closures. If we have road construction going on, folks can say, hey, I only want to know about road construction for this specific area within Crow Wing County, so that way they know that during this week, this half of the road is going to be closed, they can find alternate directions or travel as well. So that is an opt-in, and anytime the National Weather Service goes out, if you select it on there, you'll get a notification sent to your phone as well. This is the polygon that I mentioned before that the National Weather Service will send out, and again, that a specific area. Within that polygon, those phones, everyone who has a cell phone within that area, or a weather radio, if you have a weather radio, your weather radio would go off in that area as well, indicating that there's again in this case, be a tornado warning in that specific area.
Asking for a friend, does that work on flip phones too?
I don't believe so. Yeah. I can find that out though. I will get further
Just
information.
giving you a hard
Oh,
time.
is there something? Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
All right, yeah. We talked about the wireless emergency alerts and then watches versus warnings. The watches encompass that entire county versus the warnings that are very specific on in a specific area or a portion of the county. Technical assessments as far as coverage gaps, looking at those high population areas, those recreational areas, campgrounds, trails, and then establishing sound plans for those areas to ensure if there's a specific area you want to ensure that it's covered, that it's being covered adequately. End-of-life equipment, like anything, you look at radios, they always say, well, it's the end of life, and when it really comes down to it is maintenance and is the equipment being maintained and repaired. If you drive a car and you use cheap oil and you never change it, you just add oil to it, the engine's not going to last as long as something as you use synthetic and you're changing it every 3,000 to 4,000 miles. So any piece of equipment is like that. You maintain it well and it'll last a lot longer. So looking toward the future, as far as planning or having to spend to replace items, sometimes you can prolong things if they're maintained a little bit better. Communication pathway reliability. Right now, when our dispatch center sets off those sirens, they essentially push the button, and then it's, as we refer to in the military, a fire and forget. You don't know if it's going off, you don't know if it's sounding, if it's turning, or what that looks like. Unless we get feedback from those who are in that area, we don't know if it's going off. So a little bit of an issue there, but that's the way the system has always operated in the past, and that was the technology at the time, is that's just the way it functioned. We've come a long way since then, but a lot of our sirens, not only here, but again throughout the state and throughout the country, are moving towards getting upgrades to a two-way cellular option. And what that would allow for is that when our dispatch center sends that message out, it sends it to the tower and then sends a signal back to our dispatch center saying that yes, the sirens are being activated, which ones are being activated, and whether or not they're functioning properly. The sound, are they turning? And there's a continuous pathway of information between our dispatch center and that siren 24/7, where if the batteries or if it loses connection, it'll let our dispatch center know that things aren't functioning properly, so we can address those a little bit sooner. Well, a lot of times I'll get a call on some of our sirens in the county and they'll say, hey, I live at such and such location and I haven't heard the siren go off the last 3 months. So now we're 3 months into it, and then now we're have to either get somebody out to check it or wait till the next time it goes off and then have somebody out there, or this will constantly communicate with those sirens and tell us whether or not they're operating as they should be. These are just some of the current sirens that we have in the county that are utilized as warning sirens. Again, some of the age, or some of them are probably from the, and I don't even know how old some of these are, but 40 plus years old or older. Again, they still function as a siren, and they still make noise, and they still go off as they could, but are they, when they were initially put in, what was the population of that area at that time? No, they said since it's expanded, are they covering the areas that they were initially intended for, the population area, or do you need to look at possibly getting some of these upgraded as well? New siren locations, we've had a lot of, again, growth within the county, so in new parks that are put in, new trails that are put in, are we covering the areas that we really should be? And then the upgrade options as well, updating our wiring systems, our conduit. We've had, and I'll show another picture where conduit it wasn't installed properly. We've got other sirens that aren't on a battery backup, so if we lose power, they don't activate. We've got some that, as far as aluminum cabinets, they're steel cabinets and not aluminum, so they're rusting, they start to rust out. Rodents are starting to get in there. And then the control boards as well, capable of that dynamic zoning as well. What that means is, rather than setting all our sirens off for an event, that we can specifically say, hey, okay, the store is only in this portion of the county, and we're only going to set these sirens off so that we don't have those blue sky warnings out there where people are going, well, I don't see anything going on, making sure that those sirens only in those areas are being activated. This was, the ones on the left are the steel boxes, and the ones on the right are the aluminum, and the top right photo on there, you can see that has a drip loop on there. That was what I was referring to. There's some sirens out there where the conduit essentially goes from the siren straight down into the top without a drip loop, so all that condensation in the spring rolls right down into the box. So addressing those concerns as well, and making sure that all our equipment is maintained to a certain standard. And then, as you mentioned, as far as verifying the control boards, are they set up for dynamic zoning? Funding options, again, everything costs money. It seems like everything is getting more and more expensive regardless. So we're looking, there are funding options out there, working with some of the townships, and as far as Sourcewell, it's a funding option where they can either, do a cost share, or there's some funding options through Sourcewell where they'll cover the entire cost of it. Or if there's certain upgrades that need to be done, that they'll be able to assist in paying for some of those upgrades as well. When it comes to long-term, the two-way cellular option, there are federal grants out there that, there's just another one that came out that I'm working with the state on to get federal funding to pay for that, so that way that doesn't fall back on the cities and the townships, but we can get federal dollars to upgrade those systems to that two-way cellular capability. Operations and maintenance. Our testing schedule, we talked about that first Wednesday of the month. Who's confirming it? I know Baxter does a phenomenal job as far as having somebody assigned to each of the sirens to listen to make sure that they are going off. We don't get that to a lot of our sirens throughout the county, so at least we know that they are operating here in Baxter, and then reporting outages, and then what does that look like as far as getting them repaired. That maintenance cycle, do stakeholders currently have a preventative maintenance plan or contract in place? And what I've noticed, again, not just Crow Wing County, but surrounding counties in the state, most of them do not. They wait for that siren not to operate, and then it's a reaction. Okay, now we need to get somebody in and get it fixed. So trying to get away from that. And then the documentation requirements, maintaining records. So if something does happen in the county, and somebody can't come back and say, well, what does your maintenance schedule look like in the sirens? It didn't go off for that storm, or didn't go off for those wildfires. What is your maintenance cycle, or what does your maintenance plan look like? So being able to provide that, say, hey, every year or however, that we're doing a preventative maintenance on it, and to ensure that they work. Again, everything kind of comes back to liability and making sure that things are being maintained as they should. These are just the next few photos are photos of actually issues that we've come across, or I've come across in the past year. This was one siren. Again, it wasn't functioning, kept blowing a breaker, and You know, they come out, fix the breaker, or change the breaker out. Next time we go in and we set it off, or a storm we go through, it still wouldn't work. So the issue wasn't that the breaker was, you know, it's switching out the fuse of the breaker on it, wasn't addressing the root cause of the problem. And the root cause of the problem in this case was the brushes were stuck from corrosion and resulted in the arcing of the siren motor and the commutator, which was making fuses to get blown on there. So addressing the actual problem of it. And that's what we've noticed, or I've noticed, you know, working with different providers, service providers, is there really hasn't been one that focuses on the entire head to toe of the siren. A lot of them are communication groups that work on the communications side, and they'll subcontract with somebody else to do the siren portion. And then what that normally goes down to is, well, we focus on this, but that's so-and-so's problem, and then it goes back and forth, and then stakeholders get frustrated because they pay for every service trip that comes up, and then after a while, they're like, well, why are we paying all this money, and it's not getting fixed. So this siren, they had trouble with it for several months. They had somebody else come who essentially fixed it the same day, because again, they came in and they were able to take care of it the same day. This is another example of ant infestation of one of the control boards. Just over a long period of time, wasn't being checked annually, and the ants got in there and essentially shorted out their control board, and this is a several $1,000 fix, which could have been easily preventative, having ant killer or whatever it is placed in there, or identified it in the amount of time, or earlier would have prevented this, but then again, several $1,000 fix having to exchange out the entire control board. They were a great company that fixed this. Yeah, they did a great job because, again, they had a used control board on hand. They were able to switch that out. They were also identified that the main rotary bearing on the siren was seized up as well, which was also causing other issues. And they were able to, again, do a workaround where it didn't necessarily turn, but the siren functioned when we activated it. So they were able to get that up and operational that day as well. Another example of a siren that wasn't operating, they weren't sure why it wasn't operating. Well, this was the reason, was batteries hadn't been changed out since it was installed. Finally they blew up, and then there was a additional cost to clean all the acid and everything out and replace the batteries on it. So again, something that hadn't been maintained regularly or annually, where they were being checked, load tested, that to bypass these challenges. Moving forward, it's kind of a phased approach. Right now, with what I'm looking at is, again, the memorandum of agreement to do an annual maintenance. And what happened and what I found was, when I took over as emergency manager, and people would call in and working with stakeholders, and they'd ask me, well, who should I use to fix this? Because, you know, we're not happy with so-and-so, or we don't know that we haven't used anybody in the past for several years, so who should we use? And from my standpoint, I didn't feel comfortable recommending one company over another. And that was the reason for pushing out a request for proposal to all of our service providers that have done installation and maintenance of our sirens, or have done work on our sirens, and coming up with a set list of, hey, this is what, from my standpoint, we need to have done with all of our sirens and maintenance, and kind of a commutation of all the different maintenance that has been done and repairs that have been done in the past. Push that out, and then get proposals back, and be able to actually sit down with each company and say who has the best proposal, and then going forward with that one. And then I had taken that to our county board with those proposals, made my recommendation, and the one we ended up going with was emergency communication systems. They were currently doing work on several of our siren sites within the county. City of Cross Lake utilizing them quite frequently. The city of Ideal had worked on with them as well. Fairfield Township has had work done with them. Brainerd just had a recent siren installed by them as well. So we're a very known company, and they were the only proposal that provided references and contacts for references as well. So I reached out to all three of those references that they provided. Those three references are county-wide programs as well, similar to what we're trying to implement here within Crow Wing County. And each of those emergency managers that are utilizing emergency communication systems were very happy with their services and said that in the past, they had, one or two different service providers that were locally that, again, didn't specialize in sirens, and they had, challenges because they didn't specialize. And so it's kind of what we talked about before, where the communication side would be one person and the siren itself would be somebody else. So having one point of contact to go through and do a complete inventory and inspection of the sirens annually to say, okay, this is currently what that looks like, and then to kind of be able to bring that information back to me as far as emergency management and what we can look for long term that may be repaired, and then bringing it back to the stakeholders as well to say, hey, these are where your sirens kind of the current state are in, and something that maybe in 5 years looking at wanting to replace, so you can kind of budget for that at that period of time as well, rather than something not work and then having to say, okay, well, that's going to be a $20,000 repair, and then trying to come up with the money to get that fixed. So looking at kind of a long-term budgeting point of that as well. So having this memorandum agreement, getting this one company in to do all the inspection of all of our sirens, giving us a full list as far as what that current state is, and then bringing them up to a certain standard. Some sirens are going to need less repair than others, but working with those stakeholders that may need additional repairs, and then bring them up to that set standard so we can go to that next step in phase 3 to go create that, or get that funding to the federal government for that two-way cellular option to upgrade them to that point. And this was, next 3 slides are just kind of what that phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 looks like. Again, that phase 1 is just doing that inventory, doing that initial preventative maintenance. Phase 2 is addressing any concerns that were identified, and then phase 3 was getting that long term. But right now, we're just focusing on that phase 1 when it looks to getting that preventative maintenance or that annual maintenance schedule. And this was a slide that we had a working group this spring that talked about this as well. So I invited all the stakeholders that had sirens in the county to sit down and kind of talk about the challenges that they've seen and kind of walk through that process. So it wasn't just me from emergency management from Crow Wing County kind of to say, hey, this is what I think we should do. But this spring we sat down with all of our stakeholders throughout the county and said, well, what are the challenges that you're seeing out there as well? And how can we make sure that this is a coordinated maintenance program throughout the county? And again, establish and build better collaboration between the stakeholders and Crow Wing County as well. Because again, we're one team to ensuring that all of our systems function as they are intended. And these were just, again, some of the companies that were currently being used out there. And then we're moving forward as far as the MOUs or MOAs with the cities, and then other funding options that are out there as well, and grants. And I think I did not too bad with time.
A lot better than utilities.
So now I'd like to open it up to questions.
So I missed this the other night?
You could have got it twice.
He went the full hour.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, I think I did. I was a full hour the last one. So I tried to kind of summarize a few things and not to go too far in depth because I kind of wanted to make sure I had time for questions as well going forward.
Thank you. Any questions?
Do you have any questions of the contract on the consent agenda for Clayton or
Did everybody see the MOA?
That was in our packet.
That was in the packet. So when looking through the MOA, so we had asked for different service providers and to kind of give us a tiered approach. If we had, let's say we only, there was only Brainerd that wanted to do the service contract. So we only had 6 sirens through the city of Brainerd. What would that look like, versus if we could get the entire county on board to get a reduced price? So they were the only ones, emergency communication system that came forward and kind of gave us a tiered approach for as far as pricing. And if we can get all the sirens on board at 45, get 45 different stakeholders on board, it would be $575 per siren. Right now, we've got enough with the city of Cross Lake that is just waiting to get their MOA back. And we'll have that, at least that 25 to 44, which will be $600 per siren. And when he looked at in comparison to the other proposals that I had gotten back, the least amount was with Emergency Communications at $575, if we can get everybody on board, all the way up to, there was one proposal that I got back, which was $1,700 per siren to do that. In addition to the $1,700 per siren, if the siren height was over a certain height, which we have some in Cross Lake that are higher than that, it would be an extra $1,000 to get a special lift truck out to be able to service those as well. So there'd be an additional cost where there wasn't any of that into this proposal that we received from Emergency Communication Systems. And again, kind of the main points on it was there would be any fees for 2026 on it. It would be a 2027 would be the initial inspection and maintenance that would be done, and that would be done between March and May 15th of 2027. And part of that is when they do their initial inspection, they'll give us a full report as far as the make and model of the siren, the communications boards, what type of cabinets you have, and then any other recommendations as well as far as, things that maybe need to be repaired in the future. So they give that to us as well. So I'll get a copy of that, and then each stakeholder or municipality will get a copy of that as well, so you can kind of see firsthand as far as, okay, what state is our infrastructure currently in? If there's certain things that we're gonna have to look at possibly repairing, or are there things that, again, can, maybe 5-10 years down the road, so you can budget for that. Emergency Communication Systems, again, they specialize in only sirens, and they've been, again, ones where they've come to sirens we've had issues with in Crow Wing County, and where others have kind of had, stakeholders have had challenges with trying to get them up and running, where because they only specialize in sirens, they have a lot of spare parts. So if something is broken, they're usually able to swap it out with something that's used to get by, to get it operational until new parts can be brought in as well. Rather than, identifying, usually they'll come up, identify, hey, there's an issue with it, this part is broken, we're gonna have to order it, however long that's gonna take, and then they'll charge you for a service fee to come back and put it in, once that part comes in. Or if you're not sure what it is, there's sometimes 2 or 3 service fees that are associated with it, which I've noticed that's been the case in the past as well. So. I think that was kind of the key takeaways for the siren MOI.
Anything, Brad? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, you're doing a great job, and you're nothing but good person. Of course, we trained you in back.
So that's right. I had a good stepping up for that. So you thank Matt for that. So.
You've done a great job. Thanks. Jeremy, I guess you're on deck now.
Am I your way here?
You're okay, Clayton.
All right, I'll get this out of the way here, and then I'll get back up.
All right, Your Honor, Counsel, it's once again that time of the year, I guess, to be looking at the budget for next year. It's amazing how fast the years go. We just finished up the audit. Happy to report that did go very fast this year, even with a single audit. So we'll have more information on that at the next work session when the auditors will be here to present the audit results. But for tonight, I guess just kind of looking at goals and priorities as you incorporate the 2027 budget, what you'd like departments to be looking at as they put together their budgets for us to review. August. And then as well as that, some of the factors that go into the budget for next year that we need to be thinking about. And then I do have some information on some of the property tax valuation and some of the other economic indicators to share with you too. But as I mentioned, the main purpose is just to kind of hear some of the council's thoughts as we go together the budget for next year. So I did provide in the packet some of the potential impacts that could affect the budget for 27 and beyond. There weren't any real significant changes in the legislature this year that impact our budget. Levy limits are not in place for 2027. There was no change to the local government aid formula, even though that had been discussed as far as changing that. As you know, the city of Baxter does receive a significant amount of LGA for 2026. That was a little over $203,000. Last year, one of the changes that went into effect was kind of increasing the homestead market value credit exclusion. So that kind of extended the phase out of that exclusion, which reduces a homestead residential properties valuation and ultimately their amount of taxes that they pay, which is now up to that first $517,000 before it's eliminated. And that was really the first change that had been implemented since 2012. One of the changes that they did put in place, it's just a one-time item, is additional $125 million that went into property tax relief programs. So if you're familiar with that, in August, you can certainly do it before then, but in August, the state, you can apply for a refund for your property taxes based on how much your property taxes increased as well as your income of your household, and then those are direct rebates that come back from the state for residential homestead properties. So the legislature kind of recognizing some of the increases that have been occurring in property taxes, puts some one-time money into that program. One of the things that certainly does impact us a little bit more is the local option sales tax. And as you know, that moratorium was in place on that. That was allowed to expire. However, there weren't any sales tax approvals granted this year. There were over 37 proposals in the Senate tax bill this year. However, the House did not put together a tax bill. Ultimately, no sales taxes for cities and counties were approved this year. One of the interesting things I think that we're going to find as we move into next year is just the changing leadership on the tax committee. All of the Senate tax chairs and Republican committee members have retired or are retiring at the end of the session. So we all need leadership on the Senate side of the tax committee. Even though when it's been the House, that was more of the issue this year with getting the sales tax through. So we'll continue to evaluate our options and our next steps as we move through that process.
I have a question about sales tax.
Sure.
Do you have an I know that sales tax collections are up this year a bit. Do you have an estimated expiration of when the sales tax will end? And also logistically, how does that work? Is it just like a cliff that all of a sudden we get no more payments from that? Or how does that work?
Sure. We were estimating it was probably sometime in 2027 that we were estimating that we would reach the authorization that we had. So we'll have to continue to monitor that to see how that works. It usually goes to the nearest quarter. So after the end of the quarter, the department, or you notify the Department of Revenue that we've reached our limit, they would continue to hold a portion of that sales tax in their coffers because they do that for adjustments that they potentially have to make. So we apply for a refund before they close that out.
But then are you required to then notify everyone in town of that?
That would be the Department of Revenue's job.
It
They're the
is.
ones that administer it, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing in this whole thing is that, if we did have it extended in the future again, we're going to go through that whole process again with the Department of Revenue to notify all the businesses they just put in place again. So that's really the unfortunate thing, that it's just not able to continue, I guess, if that comes down to that.
So I've got notified before it's not.
That it started or
Well,
that
just
continued?
because of all the different taxes, because when we started selling THC products, just a little email that goes out, notification on
So then, I will go through some of the property valuation and new construction, trends, I guess in some of the following slides here. But then, as you know, personnel costs are a major part of the city's budget. We'll be looking at health insurance rates for 27, probably sometime next month. We typically have been factoring a 12% increase, in there. However, our utilization is sitting pretty well right now. Last year, we did see a pretty, small increase, based on the negotiation that we did with our broker. So hopefully that will be a significant net impact, I guess, going forward. So we do kind of factor in the increase for that. There weren't any changes to the police and coordinated para retirement plans for the city. Labor contracts were settled through the end of 27, so those adjustments will be factored into the 27 budget. Workers' comp premiums typically are about a 10-15% increase, however, we're hopefully seeing probably a little bit of a stabilization there too, as the league just recently announced a pretty significant dividend that they'll be refunding for that. So hopefully that's a good sign as well, that we'll see a significant impact on workers' compensation insurance premiums. And then just implementation of some of the mandates that have occurred. This year we had a paid family medical leave program that required both city and employee contributions. We are utilizing a private insurer for that. That did result in a 50-50 split of that premium, so it's a little less than 0.4% that each the employee and the employers pay. That's in comparison to the 0.44% that's at the state level currently. If you've been following that in the news a little bit too, there's some thought too that state program might have to increase just based on the utilization that's occurring in that. We haven't really heard that from MetLife, who's our private insurer for that, as well as a number of other cities are utilizing that as well. But stay tuned, I guess, for that. And then just administering some of those other unfunded mandates with the federal tax bill and the tracking of overtime for employees. It's not the same definition of overtime as what we've seen in our union contracts that is typically done. So we've had to do some manual adjustments to track that to be in compliance with that. So that we can curse it a little bit more. And then just the state ESST too. So just some of those other payroll related items. When it comes to some of the outside funding requests, one of the larger ones for the city, of course, is the fire contract with the city of Greenery. Not a significant increase, about $1,600 proposed for 27, about 1.82%. And then some of the outside funding sources, we received a request for no change from the Central Minnesota Health Initiative Foundation, as well as no change on the RED program, Joint Powers Agreement. Then, as I mentioned, insurance, hopefully not seeing a significant change in the workers' comp portion. Property insurance too, if we do budget about 5 to 10% increase just based on the claims that we had over the last few years. We won't have elections in 27, and just some other unknown things maybe at this time. That's just kind of looking at the property tax these are from the tax abstracts that the county's required to prepare, so submit to the Department of Revenue each year. So the first table here looks at the payable 27 preliminary estimated market value, now eclipsed about $1.6 billion in valuation in the city. About 62% of that is residential, homestead, and non-homestead, and then 429 million being commercial, industrial, and then residential apartments being about 157 million. Other category includes some agriculture as well as seasonal recreation. Two categories there. That's in comparison to the payable 26 final amount, which again, no real change in percentage-wise. You see the increase in the residential from just shy of $1 billion up to the $1.025 billion. But still 60% overall portion of the estimated market value when it comes to residential. Commercial is new estimated market value that was added from new construction. You kind of see comparison of 27 to 26 payable, almost double the new construction from 15 million in valuation last year to almost 28 million proposed that will be added for next year. That was added at the end of 26. Most of that is the blue is the residential that's still occurring. About 15 million of new valuation added, residential homestead, non-homestead. Apartments, 14%, about $4 million. The interesting note there is we didn't have any permits, new valuation added in 26, so that's something that's added there. And then commercial industrial increasing from 2.5 million to a little over 8 million. I put together kind of a table, just kind of updated a little bit, showing kind of that comparison. So when we compare the spring abstract, which was from this year, which is payable for next year, that's the preliminary one. I'll go through some revisions between now and the end of the year. But typically what we've done is we've taken that spring abstract and backed out that new improvements to see what the valuation would have been without those new improvements. So kind of looking at a comparison of how much the existing valuations increased. So we back out those new improvements. We have about $1.6 billion of estimated market value in comparison to what we ended last year. We had 1.579. So by doing that, it kind of shows us, again, these are budget averages, so it's not specific to each one. But these are where we use those percentages to kind of look at how much the existing valuations went up. So if you look at residential, homestead, and non-homestead, on average, about a 1.57% increase of these existing valuations is occurring from 26 to 27, comparison to commercial industrial, which is about 2%. So kind of a good sign there, because in the past, as you know, we've seen some pretty significant reductions in commercial industrial and some pretty significant increases in residential, which was resulting in, I can send this to you too, but I know some pretty significant shifts that have occurred in the past with that commercial valuation being stagnant or actually decreasing in comparison to some of those pretty significant residential valuation increases. But overall, about a 1.8% increase in valuations, just looking at existing factor in valuation was added. So then when you kind of do a comparison of the tax capacity for that, which is what's used to determine how much the levy you can generate based on your spending and tax capacity, and is used to calculate the tax capacity rate. You can kind of see that over the last 10 years, this kind of still is kind of the case where we've kind of shifted from a pretty much close to being almost even, I guess, in 2017. In the past, it was actually closer to being 60%. Commercial industrial is represented by the gray bar in comparison to the residential, which is the blue bar, to kind of a flip where it's been closer to 60% to be commercial industrial, or excuse me, residential in comparison to 40% now being commercial industrial. That's kind of just showing a little bit more probably here by the percentages. Again, about 46, 52 10 years ago versus kind of the flip now where it's 56, 41. A little bit of a flip of increase on the gold, which is kind of another category. A lot of that actually was seasonal recreation that was added. So then if you want to look at a comparison kind of to the larger local jurisdictions in Crow County, so cities as well as unorganized territory, just kind of historical 5-year comparison of the tax rates of those entities. Kind of see where we sit at. We're at a high of 57.5% for our tax capacity rate 5 years ago, and now it's at about lower 50%. at those various tax capacities, and then backing out the TIF tax capacity to come up with your net tax capacity. This graph just kind of shows that comparison a little bit. It's been pretty stable, the blue representing the TIF tax capacity, declining slightly from 2.9% of overall to 2.5%. Part of that is just the elimination of the Mantec TIF district that was decertified at the end of 2025, reached its statutory duration. So we don't have any commercial, industrial, in the form of economic development districts currently anymore, based on that. You do have about 33%, or about half, third of it in development housing related ones. Most of those are the 4D housing, so there's a significant amount of TIF being generated in some of those districts. And then we have two TIF districts, TIF District 15, which is the Isle Drive project, as well as TIF District 14, which is it's TIF District 11 and TIF District 14. TIF District 11 being or the funding portion of the Isle Drive project from the economic development, redevelopment that occurred on one of the parcels in that vicinity. And then TIF District 14, that was the Edgewood Excelsior project where the roundabout was funded primarily with the income that's being generated from those parcels that are in front of the former Walmart where Essentia is now building their clinic. We did see kind of a significant increase being proposed for next year as that construction is underway, so we'll capture some additional increment from that parcel going forward, which will potentially pay off those bonds sooner and get the area back on the tax rolls sooner. But the city infrastructure may be about 2/3 of that, just because primarily that TIF District 14 does generate some additional increment for the city. So then just real quickly, some of the economic indicators that I did include in the packet, looking at sales taxes, Patrick's kind of alluded to already. We are seeing about a 17% increase through April, higher than what it was last year. That does fluctuate a little bit. There's a pretty big blip that looks like there in March, with about a 36% increase for that. We did end 2025 up a little bit from where we were prior. That was after we had seen a slight decrease in 2024, so about 1.3% overall increase for the year, in comparison to a 2.7% decrease from the previous year. Previous year decrease really was because we saw some pretty significant increases during COVID, post-COVID in the sales tax. Overall, it's increased about 8% over that time period. That chart just kind of breaks it down by month. You can see the summer is typically the higher months of collection, followed by December. So it's a pretty big increase in March or something.
I have a question. Is there anything that could potentially, because I've noticed some odd spikes, like there's March of 2026 and 2022 were quite a bit higher. Is there anything that is that normal, or is it just kind of an anomaly?
I think it's probably an anomaly. We could probably request some additional information from the Department of Revenue. They do have to kind of aggregate some of that because they can't give out specific industries. So some of those industries are only represented by one or two firms in the area. They'll have to kind of consolidate further. But I suspect some of that's probably occurring from construction costs, so the building construction costs that are sales tax that's paid on that could result in some of those measures. And then the motor vehicle excise tax that we administer on for the $20 that we charge on the first $4,000 of the vehicle. Down just slightly year to date at this point, but otherwise it is down a little bit from the overall 5-year period as well. It's kind of all over the board as well. Then finally, kind of looking at the lodging tax receipts comparison for the city, up about 21% over the did exceed 24, but we're still slightly lower than the 4-year high back in 2023. I did include in your packet, I won't go through this, but what funds the city does budget for and what those various funds purposes are. So the general fund as well as various special revenue funds and capital project funds and then the 3 enterprise funds for water, sewer, and so on. So as I mentioned, I guess we do want to kind of hear council comments and ideas and priorities that you want departments to incorporate as they prepare their budgets, I guess, 2027.
Council?
I've got a few thoughts. I've got a couple thoughts.
Here, whatever.
All right. Just thinking ahead to the budget conversations, once you're in the details, I suggest that we make a financial investment into AI training and resources regarding automating tasks like plan review, contract review, creating policies, ways to speed up spreadsheet creation, things like that. I think it's an investment that the city should make on the front end rather than waiting until that whole topic is ahead of us. So I'm not going to necessarily state a number, but I think some reasonable amount should be invested into that technology for the benefit of speeding up processes for staff and residents. I would also like to see proactive steps on like next steps for the planning process of updating City Hall or the police department in particular to include all of the facilities that we have the obvious need that we researched for. Another one I was thinking of, I would like to see, and it's not budget number choosing, but I think it would help our budget in the future, is I think we need to add a tier or two to the top of our water usage rates. We've talked about that briefly in the past, but I think 2027 is a good time to start with that. Tying into the sales tax, I think we need to budget again for working with the legislature. I did a little back of the napkin math, and it might be just trivia, but I think it's interesting that just dividing out the 0.5% by the 3.5 million that was generated in 25, that's $711 million in taxable sales. And if we estimate our residents at 9,000, that's almost $80,000 in taxable sales per resident. I just think that's an interesting piece of trivia that goes towards the argument that it's probably not Baxter residents that are generating all of that, and it's not Baxter residents who are generating the wear and tear and use and needs for the city, which all of us in this room know we're a regional retail hub, but I think that's an interesting story to tell in terms of the amount of money that's flowing through the city is clearly being generated by a lot more people other than just residents. The only other thing that I wanted to note was I think we should make a point to, excuse me, to hold at least 2 EDA meetings in 2027 that are invested more specifically with an entity like Bladec at the lead to try to just get an outside view of what we're doing EDA-wise and what we can do better in terms of setting ourselves up for the next stage of growth. So I will leave my comments at that.
Good ones. Anybody else? Brad, do you want to comment on the building scenario or?
No, I shared with you in that context,
Okay.
with the projection of growth, so do rules and regulations and the need for additional staff. And as we move pieces and parts, the puzzle of City Hall, things of that nature, it's very clear that we will reach an end of ability to have employees here at City Hall, so one of the things that's on my forefront is carrying that City Hall conversation through the budgetary process. Doesn't necessarily mean construction in 27, but as Councilmember Tabbitt had alluded in his comments, it's, taking the next steps.
Well, you have thoughts? Send them to Jeremy's way during the week. Anybody have a problem with the schedule? Any of those dates are?
Do note that the only meeting on the schedule that's in, or this proposed budget that is not in coordination with the work session prior to council is the Tuesday of August 25th, which will be our first work session, budget work session, which will be the fourth Tuesday of August. Otherwise, the rest of them on the calendar, unless we need to schedule another work session, they're all in conjunction with work sessions that are already scheduled prior to a council meeting.
Number three, I'm sorry.
That's the only note I wanted to
Yeah.
bring up regarding the calendar.
While this moves up, I'm just gonna hand out a little update. We made a couple tweaks to the presentation, so that way everybody's looking at, you can make notes of what we're reviewing up on the screen. All right, thanks Mayor and Council for having me here tonight to kind of go over the payment management plan and the mill and overlay and FDR improvements projects and kind of what we've been seeing, what we've been going through, and the game plan that we've come up with here. So what the city follows as part to pull off these projects is the 429 process. That is a detailed process or procedure that needs to be followed in order to assess the benefiting property owners. So that involves a feasibility report, there's 8 resolutions along with it, 2 required public meetings, notification milestones where we have to send stuff to the paper 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. Everything needs to be mailed out accordingly, so that it gives all of the residents an opportunity to be notified and make it to those meetings. There's specific bidding procedures and an appeal process with this procedure. So what the city has had in the past is some frustration from the property owners just with a short notice of the project. And going back to 2017, staff did develop a plan to resolve this issue. So the goal was 18 months of notification with a minimum of 12. And what staff did in 2018 and 2019 is they followed this as best they could. It was closer to that 12 months of time that they were trying to get to that 18-month notification time frame. So 2020 to 2022, COVID happened, projects were postponed, and the payment management plan kind of just sat there. And then as we got into 2023 to now, the project's time frame just kind of got shorter and shorter and shorter, and frustration continued to build with the property owners. So to resolve that would be to reestablish that practice of the early notification schedule. For the mill and overlay projects, that would be a 12 to 18 month, emphasis on the 18 months, to either hold a public informational meeting or send out a letter. The city has sent out letters in the past, and we'll get into an example of it here shortly. And then for water and sewer projects, to also be thinking about, 18 to 36 months ahead of schedule, or ahead of construction, to get some notification out there so property owners are aware of this and can budget for it. Again, like I mentioned, for this meeting, we're just gonna focus on the mill and overlay and FDR projects. So that letter that was sent out actually in 2017 after city staff kind of had their planning session, was a very detailed letter. This letter went through background information, it talked about costs, went through the pavement management plan and how that was developed, why it was developed, some of the rationale in that. And then it went into some frequently asked questions, something that we've talked to the council as we hear the same questions all the time. And some of those questions are in this document that we could be sending out. It's important to note, there's quite a few questions in here, and this is a living document. As questions evolve, we can continue to add and modify the FAQ and bring it up to date. So as we were going through, taking a look at the projects, with the goal of construction in 2027 up there in the right-hand corner, you kind of work backwards with all those steps that we need to follow, and taking into that red box of 18 months, that puts a public informational meeting for the 2027 project in September of 2025, which leads to starting the project in March of 2025 for construction in 2027. Where we're at today for that 2027 project, you can see the two dots. So it's important to note that 18-month notification is in between the assessment hearing and that first public informational meeting. So you'd have 18 months from first notification to the assessment hearing when you're told what you will be assessed with. Gives them 18 months to save up. So for the 2027 project, we are only at 8 months of notification prior to the assessment hearing. Did a similar exercise with the 2028 project. Again, seeing a trend that for a 2028 project, we want to be starting that process in March 2 years prior. So what that looks like today is with an assessment hearing in March of 2028 and a feasible schedule being put together, we'd be holding a public informational meeting in January of 2027. So we're getting closer to that 18 months. We're over the 12 months with 14 months notification in there. So this is, again, we're getting there. We're getting better as we go on. Looking at the 2029 schedule, now we're back on track with that 18 months of notification if the project was to be initiated in March of 2027. So here's that breakdown, and this would be the ideal schedule for a project. Having an assessment hearing in March, early March, somewhere in that range, with early notification going out in September, 2 years prior. So that gives those property owners lots of notification and time to plan accordingly. So to break up that, so how we would get to that end process of getting to construction and to really help build in some efficiencies in the contracts, proposing to split those up into 4 different contracts, which you would see come through council. So the first one would be the road evaluation and recommendation memo. This is where we take the pavement management plan and draft CIP, look at what's slotted for that year. We would walk those in the March prior, or the spring year prior, and then draft a recommendation memo. Those roads would then go into the feasibility report, where we would write the feasibility report on those roads. We would identify the issues with those roads in a greater detail, and with Once those issues identified, problems have been identified, project is feasible, then that will go into the preparation of plan specifications. Once those have been drafted, go through bidding and the assessment hearing, and then the final contract would be construction administration. Once you know that contractor has been selected, they understand the schedule, we understand the schedule, is it gonna be done this year, is it gonna be carried to next year? There's a lot of factors in each of those contracts that build to the next one. So it just helps us fine tune those contracts a little bit better and helps eliminate, or helps reduce fee amendments. So, kind of concluding here, with the recommendation to continue to follow the payment management plan and draft CIP, recommend moving forward with the 2027 project to help maximize that public informational timeframe, and also start the process on the 2028 project. Get to that 14 months notification so people feel like they're well informed on what's going on in their neighborhood. And continue to reestablish that practice. Moving forward, getting to that 2029 schedule and continuing that forward and until the 5-year CIP is developed. Once that 5-year CIP developed, then the process will change with a little bit further notification. And it just defines that as we move forward. So, any questions?
Also, any questions or thoughts on that?
I like it. I think it's funny. Because as I was, reading through this, I noticed that Jack Ryan Edward Drive is going to be on the 2027 project. Just because I know that. And I looked at the ideal flow chart for this. It's like, yeah, that'd be a bit nice to know that far in advance. And now to see it's like, oh, it's gonna be tight. So to see working towards before it makes sense. Especially that five-year CIP. I know things change, but to be at least looking out 5 years, so people at least have an inclination of if something might be coming in the next 5 years. I think that's really good.
Maybe a couple of quick comments. It might be too expensive to add mailings to that process, but I'm wondering if maybe we can do something technologically, and I know it would require people proactively offering emails before they necessarily know they have a need, but if we can start building technology processes to get people on a more general city mailing list where they can choose, this is my address, this is my email, and we could send out a notice that says, FYI, your property is going to be on a feasibility study. Now you're adding more time on the front end. And if people understand the concept that in Baxter there's going to be assessments, at least for the sort of foreseeable future, that also indicates to them, like, I'm in a feasibility study, therefore something's going to happen that's probably going to cost me money. That might help, and it's getting more complicated, but I'm thinking further ahead and trying to, I guess, encourage more electronic communications beyond the required and legally necessary mailers that have to be sent. And I would agree with Mr. Sundberg's comment that I'm really happy to see the notification stretching out, and at some point in the future, I would even kind of softly suggest now that maybe once we get this indicated and everything's in order, maybe someday we look at a policy that kind of puts stakes on that and says, if we can't get the notification out at least 12 months ahead or a certain amount of months ahead, it's city policy that we just can't do the project. Not this time frame, am I suggesting that, but once we have our notification set in that 29 period, things like that.
I was digging through that email and or the notice that was going out, and my first thought is like a lot of that we just live on our website somewhere, and it can be generic information, but people will go find information. You'd be surprised if there's information available as far as like how the process that people find it. So I think that'd be to get as much information
sheriff's have a way of making it a requirement that they're included in all the information too. I realize they can access the information, but it seems like time and time again, we've heard from property owners, well, I bought this house a year ago and no one told me, so I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, staff, anything to add? Brad?
No, in the conversations with Alex, based upon Councilmember Tabbitt's request to have us research it, it was going back in history where we fell off the railroad tracks per se, in regards to the notification. It just happened to be as we had those 3 years of not having residential construction other than the North Forest View in 1920. And then 22, following that back up, was it 23, 22, 23, whatever the Southern Forest View part was. That was really our only residential, three. So, as you got all those roads that were scheduled for those years that we didn't put it back in there, reassessing it, kind of fell short. Now, looking at this, getting to a point where we can see where we can get back to that 12 to 18 month is where we promised the council back in 17.